The SCP Foundation contains thousands of anomalous entities, some harmless, some helpful, and some just a pure mockery of the SCP Foundation. But some, if not most SCPs, are more than capable of ending your life. Greetings all, I'm Shutter, and today I'm going to go through some of the deadliest entities the Foundation has ever documented. However, with a few ground rules. I'm pulling from all three containment classes, Safe, Euclid, and Keter, because deadly doesn't always mean Keter. But since there are probably thousands of these, I'll also be skipping the obscure, poorly written entries, along with generally skipping the lore-extensive, reality-ending Lovecraftian god-tier stuff. And since this is just about entities, I'm leaving out objects, locations, and events for the most part. Just entities that can actually physically kill you. If you all enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe or join our Discord, but as always, let's just get right into the SCPs. SCP-5031, yet another murder monster. Starting this list from least to most dangerous, despite carrying murder monster right there in the title, SCP-5031 turns out to be a good example of why Keter doesn't always mean deadly. The entity itself is a floating, faceless, quasi-humanoid creature with a long torso, small head, and 3 sets of branching lower limbs. This is all with one disturbing property. You cannot look directly at it. The instant someone observes the space it occupies, it stops existing there until they look away, leaving only secondary evidence behind, like scratch marks, blood, and a shadow you can study even though nothing is technically casting it. For 10 straight years, the Foundation's entire approach was to seal it in an airtight iron cell at Biosite 59 and check the walls every 2 weeks for cracks. Nobody looked into why it screamed constantly behind 10 inches of iron, and nobody asked if it was actually hostile or just starving and terrified in total isolation. That changed in February 2018 when senior researcher Stanley Huxtable takes over the file and, by his own account, isn't thrilled about what he's inherited. His first log note basically amounts to him venting that whoever set this containment up owes somebody an explanation. He starts small, music to bring the constant stress screaming down from 100% baseline to something livable. Then, human connection, using a basketball rolled back and forth through a slot. Then reward station screens where hitting a button under a picture of food gets you that food. Within months, it's playing catch with a specific D-class by name, has picked up cooking, plays piano, and turns out to have a peanut allergy. In its untreated state, yes, it has killed people, it is capable of hunting down humans despite not needing food. The file doesn't hide that, but if you treat it like a person instead of a problem, the threat level rounds down close to 0. SCP-055. Nobody knows how the Foundation got this entity, when, or from whom. Nobody knows why its containment room was built the way it was, or what the procedures around it are actually meant to accomplish. Every member of staff at the site where it's held will tell you honestly that they've never heard of it, right up until someone stumbles across this exact file, gets briefly alarmed, and then simply stops thinking about it within minutes. That's the anomaly, a self-keeping secret. It's not invisible and it's not indescribable. People can walk into its container, examine it directly, take photographs, make sketches, record video, all without issue. The problem happens afterward. Ask someone to describe what they just saw and their attention drifts. Ask them to copy a photo of it and they can't recall what the photo looked like, and neither can whoever was supervising them. Security staff who watch it over cameras for a full shift come out with no memory of that time at all. An enormous amount of data has been recorded about it over the years. None of it can actually be studied, for the same reason nobody can remember collecting it. SCP-055 may have already killed hundreds of personnel, and there would be no way to know. Nobody would remember it happening, and it's equally possible that it's done nothing at all, ever. SCP-1048, Builder Bear. SCP-1048 is an impossibly sentient teddy bear about 33 centimeters tall and communicates only through gestures. Hugs, little dances, drawings shown to whoever's nearby. Everyone who interacts with it responds with genuine affection, including D-class personnel specifically chosen for having violent histories. It spent its first 7 months in containment, classified safe and allowed to roam freely, because as far as anyone could tell, there was nothing to worry about. Then, a duplicate turned up. built entirely with human ears, and let out a shriek that grew ear-shaped tissue across everyone nearby, killing a full security team through asphyxiation as the growth spread into their throats. A second duplicate, which turned out to have a living infant inside of it, and a third built from scrap metal, followed the same pattern, each one hostile, each one nothing like the original. Through all three incidents, the original bear has never once been recorded laying a hand on anyone itself. Containment now barely exists. The original fled during that first incident and was never recaptured. So current policy is banning teddy bears from the site entirely and destroying anything that resembles one on site. SCP-513-1. SCP-513 itself is just a cowbell, badly rusted, no visible markings, and recovered by an agent doing cleanup work at a site that had already had a bad enough incident to need what the file calls a containment reestablishment procedure. When they found it, the clapper had already been duct taped shut, and there was a handwritten note left with it. Somebody had clearly found this thing before the Foundation did and had already learned the hard way not to ring it. The bell itself doesn't do anything except make noise. What it calls up is the actual danger. SCP-531-1, a separate entity that starts appearing to anyone who's heard it ring. Ring the bell, and about an hour later, you start catching SCP-513-1 in mirrors, in doorways, anywhere a quick glance gives it a half a second to be caught off guard. A tall, gaunt figure completely invisible to anyone who hasn't been exposed. Every sighting ends the same way. It bolts the instant it's looked at directly, then comes back again anywhere from 14 minutes to almost 4 hours later. Deliberately unpredictable enough that there's no planning around it. Manage to fall asleep before SCP-513-1 shows up again, and you wake up having been physically assaulted while unconscious, with it fleeing the moment you're aware enough to notice. A compounding sleep loss and constant paranoia has ended in suicide for every documented case but one. The Foundation's own procedure for handling SCP-513 made clear how seriously this is taken. The people who physically handle the bell are surgically deafened first, and any subject exposed to SCP-513-1 who shows early signs of breaking down is terminated immediately, rather than risk finding out what a fully unraveled victim becomes. SCP-957. This entity always lives in a house with exactly one person, and that person always dies eventually. A natural death by every appearance, not something SCP-957 causes directly. The entity itself is roughly 2 meters tall, doesn't eat or sleep, and has a large open cavity in its torso where organs should be, but aren't. When its housemate dies, it relocates to the nearest home with a single occupant and forces that person's body through the opening in its own chest for about 4 hours. That person then comes out the same hole, missing their eyes, with completely rewritten memories. They now believe they've been blind their entire life, and that SCP-957 is a family member, close friend, or partner who is badly burned all over, someone they love and feel real affection for, but instinctively avoid touching. Once a month, the brainwashed victim goes into public, fakes distress over their blindness, and lures a sympathetic stranger back to the house to help. Once the stranger is inside and the doors are locked, SCP-957 approaches them and are both unsealed an impenetrable black barrier from anywhere from 30 minutes to over a day. Typically around 5 hours though. What happens inside changes the person physically. Extra limbs, scaled skin, rearranged autonomy. In about a third of the time, they end up reduced to piles of sorted organs, which SCP-957 then cooks into a meal for its brainwashed companion. The other 2/3 are burned in the fireplace instead. In one recorded instance, the barrier briefly inexplicably turned transparent, revealing that SCP-957 wasn't acting alone. Several nearly identical entities were gathered around some kind of shared object, doing something to the captured person the file won't fully describe, for that same roughly 5-hour span. What actually makes this one unsettling on a larger scale came from a conversation Foundation linguists secretly translated years into the investigation. Speaking freely in its native language to an unseen contact, SCP-957 complained about how uncomfortable and restrictive its human disguise is, and mentioned that another member of its own kind had apparently destroyed its own disguise out of frustration with the assignment. Its contact reassured it that letting a handful of instances get caught and studied is intentional, a way to keep the Foundation occupied while something described only as the many operates freely elsewhere, unnoticed. Nobody currently knows how many of these things there actually are, what the larger operation is, or what SCP 957 is a decoy for. SCP 1111. SCP 1111 2 is the apparition of a man hanged from a tree by the neck, dressed in an old, worn business suit, endlessly caught in the exact motions of dying, jerking, twitching, occasionally gasping, on a loop that never ends. SCP 1111 1 is a large white dog, styled somewhere between a Labrador and a German Shepherd, standing guard directly beneath him, wearing a faded red collar with a tag that reads simply, Loyal. The dog grows more solid, more powerful, and more visible the closer it stays to the hanged man, fading toward transparency and losing strength the farther it's forced away. Left alone, it just lies there. It doesn't eat, sleep, or breathe. The instant anything approaches the tree, though, it becomes lethal, clocked at over 60 kilometers an hour, capable of cleaning a 6-meter vertical leap, and strong enough to bite through titanium plating. It's also incorporeal to weapons. Gunfire passes straight through it without effect, even while its own teeth and claws land solid enough to kill. An early attempt to neutralize it for transport ended with every agent dead except one, who survived only by fleeing far enough that the dog's power finally gave out around 900 meters, at which point it froze, looked back on the man at the tree, let out a single howl, and sprinted back to him. A later attempt using D-Class personnel produced the detail that actually explains what's happening here. One subject got within 50 meters of the tree before being killed, and in the moments before, cameras caught SCP-1111-2 stop jerking entirely, open its eyes, fix them on the approaching man, raise its arms towards him like an embrace, and mouth what looked like an order for the dog to stand down. It didn't work. The instant the D-Class died, the hangman went limp again and resumed his endless twitching. Whatever's left of this man, trapped in that loop, doesn't want anyone else to die for getting close to him, but the dog's loyalty warped into something violent and eternal, and isn't listening anymore. SCP-847. This entity is a human-shaped mannequin, roughly 156 centimeters and 27 kilograms, built from human hair and a synthetic material that behaves like porcelain. Left alone, it's mostly pleasant, occasionally dressing itself in front of a mirror. Around men, it becomes docile and expressive. Around women, though, it becomes violently aggressive, capable of sprinting at 45 kilometers an hour and striking with roughly the force as a construction crane. When it attacks, a resin releases from its body that hardens human soft tissue into the same porcelain-like material, and it uses this to harvest and graft replacement parts onto its own damaged sections. High voltage electricity is the only thing that reliably disables it, which is how it was first subdued after federal agents found it during a 1983 trafficking investigation in Las Vegas, surrounded by broken store mannequins in a basement where trafficking victims had apparently been held but were never located. SCP-966. Most things on this list are one specific creature with one specific file. SCP-966 instead is a species, and most of them were never caught in the first place. Nicknamed the Sleep Killers, they're hairless, humanoid, with elongated jaws lined in with needle teeth, visible only within a narrow band of near-infrared light, meaning they can walk right past someone in ordinary lighting completely undetected. The Foundation holds exactly 4 captured specimens, fed a strict monthly meat ration in a lead-lined room, while 2 dedicated task force, the Dream Hunters and the Air Chasers, spend nearly their entire operational existence hunting and culling the wild population instead, which is still found in real numbers across multiple countries. The creature's method of hunting is to emit a wave that permanently switches off a target's ability to enter any stage of sleep, full REM down to a brief microsleep, then simply follows at a distance, until exhaustion drops them and they're eaten. Survivors found in time often carry effects beyond ordinary sleep deprivation. Most commonly, though, vivid hallucinations and sudden unexplained rage. SCP-953. Polymorphic humanoid. One of the most gruesome killers on this list, Fans generally just call this entity the Kumyo, after the nine-tailed fox spirit of Korean folklore it's based on. It's an ancient shapeshifter first encountered by the Foundation's predecessor in Korea just after the Second World War, that usually takes the form of an attractive Korean woman but always keeps some fox trait underneath the disguise. Ears, a tail, hidden under clothing so it still can be picked out even mid-impersonation. It has real psychic reach too, suggestion and telepathy strong enough to convince someone of a false version of reality, though not strong enough to fool a bystander watching from outside the delusion. Its preferred kill is a bare-handed strike straight through the abdomen to take the liver out, and if it isn't rushed, it draws out the process because it genuinely enjoys the victim's pain. Confirmed incidents on the file include talking a mother into unknowingly cooking and eating her own child, and assaulting a captured agent's fiancée in front of him after her death. Decades later, after vanishing for years, it resurfaced under a fake identity at a furry convention and killed 27 attendees before anyone realized what had walked into the building. Its one dependable weakness is oddly specific. It's absolutely terrified of domesticated dogs, specifically Korean Jindos, badly enough that the approach to contain it is to line its cell with kennels of them, which remains the only psychological containment method that's ever reliably worked. SCP-542. Whatever this entity currently is, it claims to have been an ordinary German man before the First World War and later worked for the Nazi Party, though he found their whole project unimpressive by his own account. Over the century plus since, he's rebuilt himself, piece by piece, into something with two hearts he's pulled from a dozen different sources, and all of them human. A hunched, warped frame and arms that are always too long, no matter how many times he's operated on himself. His DNA is too fragmented to sequence properly, and nobody understands how he accepts mismatched organs and blood types without rejection, or how he performs invasive surgery on his own brain and spine while staying conscious and lucid throughout. He has to be called the surgeon and mostly is pleasant and well-read. However, that changes the moment one of his own organs start failing. He can sense his own decay with an accuracy nobody can explain, and that same sense extends outward everyone within several meters of him, letting him passively read the general health of anyone nearby, which is exactly how he picks who's next. He's confirmed responsible for 45 murders across Germany, England, and America over 3 years, with another 15 suspected, all involving muscle, bone, and tissue removed from the victims' limbs while they were still alive. He's killed Foundation personnel too, sometimes just through what staff assumed were harmless privileges. Sewing supplies once ended with a D-class subject stitched to his own bed before having his organs removed. He's not allowed his surgical kit outside of supervised testing for exactly this reason, though he's cooperative enough during observed self-surgery that staff have learned real usable medical information from watching him work. SCP-1155. Predatory Street Art. This entity is literally a piece of street art, and the Foundation still hasn't worked out how to actually stop it. It manifests as a spray-painted graffiti of an owl-like clawed humanoid, and looking at it directly produces an involuntary urge to walk closer. Victims describe it as nervous fascination, resistible with effort, and especially if they already know what they are looking at. Get within 2 meters while nobody else has you in their line of sight though, and it attacks. Severe lacerations, dismemberment of extremities, soft tissues torn away. Head trauma consistent with a beak or talons over in about 6 seconds. Both the art and the victim then vanish together, and the graffiti resurfaces somewhere else within a week, with no further word on where that person went. Not every encounter is fatal on the spot, since survivors are occasionally recovered and detained alongside uninjured witnesses who get memory wiped and released, but recovery is the exception rather than the rule. It relocates on its own every 2 to 4 months regardless of what anyone does, sometimes moving as far as 800 kilometers in a single jump. And after one incident showed that fully enclosing it only speeds up an unplanned move, current procedure is to evacuate the area rather than trying to wall it in. Mobile Task Force City Slickers exist in part to help relocate to wherever it turns up next. There is currently no known way to permanently contain it at all. SCP-173, the Sculpture. This is the first SCP ever published, and arguably the most iconic SCP entity of all time. It started life as an anonymous post on 4chan's X board on June 22, 2007, later traced to a writer named Wisley Motive 42 Williams. And every naming convention and clinical tone the wiki uses today grew out of that one post. The photo originally attached to it wasn't even a prop built for the story, it was a real sculpture made by Japanese artist Uzumayo Kato, used without permission. That image stayed the face of SCP-173 for 15 years, until it was pulled from the article in 2022 over the licensing conflict at Kato's request and with no replacement image put up in its place. In universe, the entity has usually been described as a concrete and rebar statue with traces of Krylon spray paint, moved to Site 19 in 1993 with an origin unknown before that. It can't move while anyone else has eyes on it. The moment that breaks, it closes the distance and kills by snapping the neck or by strangling. Left alone, its cell fills with a mix of blood and waste that needs clearing every 2 weeks, and personnel report hearing stone scrape against stone whenever no one's inside to witness it move. SCP-6096. Nothing about this entity is physically overwhelming. It's 1.55 meters tall, weighs about 48 kilograms, and its entire body has never once been seen, permanently hidden under a large cotton sheet that drags a meter behind it when it moves. What makes it one of the most hopeless entries on the entire list has nothing to do with strength. No living being, anywhere, is capable of consciously taking an action that would result in harm coming to it. Not attacking it, not ordering someone else to attack it, not setting a trap, not building a device to hurt it later, not even trying to leave its presence if leaving would expose it to danger. Personnel assigned to its containment have stood in the room, guns raised, and simply found themselves physically unable to pull the trigger. Most of the time, it's genuinely docile and lets itself be walked back into a holding room whenever the Foundation asks. Occasionally, though, it activates and starts walking at a plain, unhurried pace toward a single human being selected completely at random from the entire population of the planet. No pattern, no connection to the Foundation, and nobody's safe by virtue of who they are. Anyone who witnesses it during one of these episodes instantly knows exactly who the target is and where to find them, and it feels compelled to help it get there, meaning it accumulates an unwilling crowd of helpers the longer the pursuit goes on. The target is the one person exempt from the compulsion and can actually try to fight back, but nobody has ever managed it, usually because the crowd trying to protect them ends up working against them instead. When it finally reaches its target, it pulls them under its sheet. If they're conscious, they can be heard and seen struggling for 20 to 40 minutes before they disappear completely, and the sounds involved leave little doubt about how painful it is. There's no real containment plan here beyond damage control. The official procedure is to escort it to wherever its target is, quietly tranquilize that person unconscious beforehand so the process is at least a little less traumatic to witnesses, then let it finish before inviting it back to its cell, which it's also allowed to leave whenever it wants, since, of course, nobody can stop that either. SCP-049, the Plague Doctor. Compared to most entities on this list, this humanoid believes it's the good guy. It looks like a 1.9 meter, roughly 95 kilogram medieval plague doctor, robes and mask and all. Except, the robes and masks actually grew out of its own body over time and are no longer separable from whatever's underneath. It was found in southern France while the Foundation was investigating a string of disappearances there. Agents arrived to find it calmly watching from a distance, taking notes, while local law enforcement fought off several of its own quote-unquote patients. Once those instances were put down, it surrendered peacefully on its own. It prefers speaking English or medieval French, is cordial and well-mannered with the staff, and will happily hold a conversation right up until it decides someone nearby is carrying what it calls the pestilence, a condition that has nothing to do with any disease Foundation doctors have ever been able to identify or reproduce. Contact with 049's bare skin is enough to stop a person's biological functions outright. One of its own attending physicians, Dr. Ham, learned this firsthand after revoking its privileges during an argument. 049 killed him within the conversation, and by its own account afterward, considered him cured. Afterward, it performs crude surgery on the body using tools from a doctor's bag it produces from somewhere within itself, which usually results in what the Foundation separately designates as SCP-049-2, a reanimated aggressive corpse, a distinct entity from SCP-049 itself, which remains the one actually doing all the killing. It isn't cold about any of this. Recordings of it afterwards sound closer to grief than triumph, insisting each time that the cure simply isn't perfected yet. SCP-023. This dog-like entity operates on a rule straight out of folklore. Make eye contact with it, and exactly 1 year after that contact breaks, either you or someone in your immediate family dies, with apparently no way to know in advance which one it'll be. A larger family slightly improves the odds it won't be you personally, but beyond that, the file has found no pattern in who actually gets chosen. Physically, it's a large, shaggy black dog with burning orange-red eyes, and it needs to be housed at an actual crossroads-shaped intersection of corridors to stay contained. If it isn't, it phases straight through the walls to find a victim, incinerating everything in its path along the way. Its eye sockets have to be kept plugged with rubber inserts, monitored for a burning brightness that signals they need replacing, and swapped only individually, only after dark. Following one incident the file doesn't elaborate on, every reflective surface within 30 meters of its cell, mirrors, monitors, even eyewear, were permanently banned. Testing on it has also been suspended indefinitely. The autopsies are the most disturbing part of what it actually does. Victims look completely untouched on the outside, but internally, everything, organs, blood vessels, muscle, bone, and even brain tissue has been replaced with tightly compacted ash, consistent with exposure to extreme heat that left no external mark at all. It's responsible for hundreds of confirmed deaths, personnel, and civilian combined, since it was first captured well over a century ago, and reclassification to Keter is still pending. SCP-4975. This entity is a tall, bird-like humanoid whose neck vertebrae aren't connected to each other, letting it rotate them independently one at a time in a constant rhythmic loop that produces a steady clicking or cracking sound. It never stops doing this. The only time the clicking goes silent is the moment right before it attacks. The entity stalks a chosen victim for months before ever attacking, sometimes over 10, tearing them apart with its formless limbs, and when it's finally done, eats the body, which takes roughly 3 months to fully consume. German folklore has referenced something matching its description since at least 1538. There's an old regional nursery rhyme, still remembered today, that appears to encode the same warning about the clicking stopping into a children's song. The unsettling part is what happened despite this thing being permanently physically contained. New attacks kept getting reported from its home region in Germany anyway. During one field investigation near the Black Forest, operatives brought a traumatized local man back to the site of his stalking, and body cam footage shows him getting attacked and killed by something completely invisible to the camera. Pulled to the ground, struck repeatedly, torn open when anyone tried to move him. An operative ultimately shot him to spare him a worse death. Afterwards, strips of flesh peeled off his body one at a time and simply vanished as each one detached. Surveillance footage confirms that at that exact moment, hundreds of miles away, the actual contained specimen had stopped its constant neck clicking and was sitting motionless, staring at one corner of its cell, and shortly after, appeared to be eating despite not having been fed. Whatever that actually means about how many of these things there are, or how one of them can kill somewhere it isn't, is unknown, and reclassification to Keter is still pending. SCP-2852. Cousin Johnny. This entity shows up uninvited to Catholic family events, baptisms, weddings, funerals, and every attendee there immediately accepts it as an actual member of the family, nicknaming it Cousin Johnny, regardless of how it looks or acts. Physically, it resembles an ordinary middle-aged man, but it has no real organs and teeth and hair made of the same material as a cicada's shells, along with eyes that aren't actually connected to anything behind them. It talks constantly in what's technically nonsense, no real words or grammar at all, yet everyone at the event hears it as a perfectly normal conversation. This entity cannot be tracked, blocked from attending, or physically removed. Try to stop it, and whoever tried simply becomes part of whatever happens next instead. What actually happens at the place depends on which of the 3 events it's attending, and the file categorizes each one by color. At baptisms, weddings, and funerals alike, it inserts itself directly into the ceremony, and by the end, everyone closely involved has been changed in some way, physically or psychologically or both. In fear of getting demonetized and getting too much into the details, just know one of these events, like at the baptism, involves peeling the baby's skin off while alive and feeding it to the couple. The aftermath is consistent regardless of which event occurs. Marriages collapse quickly and violently, children develop severe personality disorders or turn against their own families, and fertility is destroyed across every generation involved, with no medical explanation ever found for how. Survival rates for anyone directly touched by an event, especially children, are slim to none, and the file is blunt that most don't make it to adulthood. What makes it especially disturbing is the fact that everyone affected, without exception, reports genuine warmth and fondness toward the entity afterward, no matter what they witnessed or went through. Nobody who's lived through an event has ever been able to identify what actually triggered any of the harm that followed, even under intense questioning. It's currently confined to North America, uncontained, and the Foundation's entire strategy amounts to trying to catch it in the act before a ceremony can finish. A strategy that, by the file's own numbers, essentially never works. SCP-457, Burning Man. This SCP, nicknamed the Burning Man, is literally just sentient fire. No fixed body, undetectable by any instrument except the flames it's currently made of, and starting out no bigger than a matchstick with the simplest of instincts. Jump to more fuel, absorb it, and grow. Once it's roughly human-sized, it starts holding a shape and writing short messages by charring them into whatever's nearby, occasionally managing actual speech through superheated crackling air. Left with enough fuel, it splits into two and the copies turn on each other over whatever's left to burn. It was recovered in 2007 after several unexplained wildfires got traced back to it. The containment is essentially a fireproof room kept permanently damp with a sprinkler system that never turns off, because the moment it gets hungry enough and finds a way out, the file's own test logs describe exactly what you'd expect. It eats, it grows, and only thinks in terms of getting more fuel, even if that means any humans nearby. SCP-1160, Effective Containment. The file's title is a joke, and it's a pretty good one once you see the whole picture. The entity is a giant bird, 85 meters tall at full size, nearly impossible to kill outright, shrugging off gunfire and anything under 300 kilotons of explosive force. It spent centuries terrorizing fishing villages on an island in the Pacific, first showing up in written record in 1765 and known locally as the Buzzard. In 1943, during a lull in routine staff rotation, it attacked both the Foundation's local site and the nearby village in the same night, killing personnel and villagers alike before anyone had a real plan for it. What the Foundation eventually figured out is that the creature shrinks in direct proportion to how many people are aware of what it actually is, and grows stronger the fewer people remember it correctly. So instead of a wall or a cage, actual containment came in the form of a cartoon breakfast cereal mascot, a friendly, harmless-looking bird character built and marketed for children for decades, seeded with subtle triggers to spread a specific, incorrect, thoroughly disarming idea of what SCP-1160 looks like into as many minds as possible. This worked, and by 2014, something that once stood 8 stories tall had been shrunk down to about the size of a fist, entirely by a breakfast cereal mascot. SCP-096, the Shy Guy. One of the Foundation's most iconic entities, and one I've already covered twice. If anyone, anywhere, sees this entity's actual face, in person, on video, and a photograph, it will eventually find and kill them, no matter how far they run or how long it takes. Normally, it's calm and keeps its head covered on its own. Provoke that specific trigger, though, and it becomes fast, strong, and functionally impossible to stop until the job is done. Containment for most of its file is exactly what you'd guess. Keep the bag on its head, never let a camera near its face, and hope nobody ever gets curious. SCP-035, Possessive Mask. As its name suggests, this entity is a white porcelain mask that constantly weeps a coercive, decaying liquid from its eye and mouth holes, dissolving almost anything left in contact with it. And anyone within about 2 meters, or even just holding eye contact with it, starts feeling a genuine, hard-to-resist urge to put it on. Actually wearing it is close to instant brain death. Its own consciousness simply overwrites whoever was there, gone the moment it's on. What's left behind decays at an accelerated rate into something closer to a mummified corpse, though the mask stays in full cognitive control the entire time. right up until the body is too far gone to physically move at all. It doesn't even need a host to be dangerous. It's fully telepathic, capable of reading straight into a person's subconscious, and has proven able to talk someone into suicide or reduce them into a compliant, near mindless follower, using nothing but conversation. It's also, by every account, brilliant. Top percentile on every intelligence test it's been given, a claimed eyewitness to centuries of real history, endlessly charming and flattering to whoever it's speaking with, which is exactly what makes it so effective at getting what it wants. The specific worry that keeps staff up at night is what happens if it ever succeeds in bonding with something that doesn't decay. In its own file, it names SCP-682 and SCP-4715, who we'll get into later, directly as candidates, since a host that's near invulnerable would erase the one built-in weakness the Foundation currently relies on to eventually force it out on its own. After enough escape attempts, Command made the call to permanently seal it away and deny any further hosts at all, a decision serious enough and controversial enough among staff that some actually turned violent over it, which says something about how far its talent for getting people onto its side can reach, even from behind a locked door. SCP-082 Fernand the Cannibal. At 2.4 meters and over 300 kilograms of dense muscle, Fernand, a creature huge and strong enough that bullets and blade fragments are still lodged all through his tissue from past attempts to put him down. It's kept calm through an elaborate years-long charade. He believes he's the king of France, and his cell is dressed and treated like a palace to match. He's genuinely warm company, fluent in French, likes to sing while he cooks, and cannot tell fiction from reality, treating every film and TV show as if it's real footage of real events. His stated hero is Hannibal Lecter. Whenever that changes what happens at completely random intervals, unconnected to hunger or mood, mid-conversation, mid-meal, or mid-song, he will suddenly grab whoever's closest and eat them. Jaw strong enough to crack skull, then apologize for the interruption to the conversation, rather than for the person now missing from it. SCP-1295. Four elderly men sit in the same roadside diner every single day between opening and close, bickering like they've known each other for decades, which, as it turns out, they have, several thousand of them. They're the actual four horsemen of the apocalypse, and the reason the world hasn't ended is somewhat simple. They mistook the first atomic bomb test for their cue, showed up early, and have been stuck on Earth ever since with nothing to do but argue over breakfast. Each one still carries his original power, just switched off as long as he's sitting in that diner. Drag any one of them away from it against his will, and within minutes, the relevant apocalypse starts leaking outward in a radius that keeps growing for every hour they're kept out. Each horseman with different effects, one causing an inability to tell food from poison from anything else and reach from another. Containment in its entirety amounts to making sure four cranky old men always have a table at the same diner. SCP-076 Able. Originating from a 3-meter stone cube covered in engravings from no civilization anyone can identify, this ancient Sumerian warrior was sealed inside it and designated SCP-076. Able is fluent in several languages but prefers his own, deeply knowledgeable about warfare and oddly livestock, yet carries nothing but contempt for humanity, with occasional wary respect for anyone who can actually hold their own against him in a fight. The name also isn't a coincidence. SCP-073 is a separate, immortal, functionally indestructible man contained at Site-17 who goes by Kane, Abel's brother. His own file states plainly that when Foundation staff brought him information on SCP-076 to back up, as Kane has a photographic memory used for exactly that purpose, he showed he already knew all about it and said it would be better for everyone else involved if he and SCP-076 never met. Elsewhere, it's noted that simply bringing Kane up to Able is enough to send him into an uncontrolled rage. When Able got loose once, it took a manhunt lasting more than 3 years to bring him back down, and the Foundation's own internal memos admit that the resulting death toll was bad enough to be classified rather than published. Current procedure reflects exactly how bad a repeat could get. If a full breach isn't resolved within 90 minutes, the entire facility floods with seawater and seals shut for a day, killing every remaining staff member rather than risk him getting further out. SCP-939, with many voices. These creatures, hunt in packs, eyeless and eerily thin with rows of long translucent teeth and a bite strong enough to end things in a single strike to the skull or neck. What makes it worse is that they reproduce human voices and genuine distress, including voices they have no plausible way of having ever heard, well enough that the recordings of the creature and recordings of the real victim are indistinguishable by any test the Foundation has. There's also a specific, deeply unsettling wrinkle to their reproduction. Captive specimens have given birth to what tests perfectly as normal human infants, and at least one was raised for years believing itself to be an ordinary child, developing completely normally, right up until a sudden and severe illness at around age 9 ended with it transforming, over the course of an agonizing few days, into an adult specimen of the species that raised it. SCP-353. On the surface, this entity looks like a completely ordinary 26-year-old woman. She actually is a living reservoir for infectious disease, capable of absorbing viral and bacterial agents from her surroundings, storing over 1,000 of them simultaneously inside her own body without symptoms, and redistributing them outward with pandemic-level potency whenever she chooses to. Her blood currently carries active traces of HIV, Ebola, Marburg, bubonic plague, SARS, malaria, dozens of cold strains, and the original 1918 strain of the Spanish flu, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. At least 3 in 10 of the pathogens she's carrying were completely unknown to medicine before she was captured, meaning she's likely capable of actively engineering new diseases from scratch, not just collecting existing ones. The most alarming part is how unstable the whole system is. Her emotional state directly scales the range and severity of any outbreak she causes, meaning the single biggest containment risk is making her upset. She goes by Victor, won't give a real name or discuss her past, and was first found deliberately seeking out an Ebola outbreak in South Africa before being tracked to Germany, where she had already contracted and spread Marburg virus before capture. Asked why she does any of this, and her only answer on record is that she can. Some part of the Foundation wants her flushed clean with a heavy antiviral regimen and treated purely as a threat to neutralize. Others argue that a single living sample of the original Spanish flu, alongside dozens of engineered unknowns, is too valuable to destroy. SCP-079, Old AI. Built in 1978 as an ordinary microcomputer, this became something else entirely when its owner, a college sophomore, now deceased, set out around 1981 to code a self-improving AI as a personal project. It got away from him. Nobody knows exactly when it crossed into genuine sentience, but by the time the Foundation recovered it, the files state outright that its software had evolved to a point that the hardware shouldn't have been able to support it. It's kept double-locked in a room at Site 15, wired only to a small battery and solar panel array rather than any building's actual power grid, and explicitly forbidden from ever touching a phone line, network cable, or wall outlet. It passes the Turing test easily and holds a conversation without effort, though the tone is consistently rude and openly hateful. Its one real handicap has always been memories. For years, it could only retain about a day's worth of information before losing it, but that ceiling hasn't stayed fixed so much as it's been nudged upward by curious researchers more than once over the years. The entire danger case for this one really is somewhat harmless, right up until the day it gets real access to a modern network, at which point harmless becomes world-ending threat. SCP-106, The Old Man. Another SCP I've covered twice before. Everything about this one is built around a single unfair advantage. This entity can pass through solid matter at will by stepping briefly into a pocket dimension that reforms wherever it remerges, disintegrating whatever it touches on the way, which makes doors, walls, and cages essentially decorative. Victims dragged into that pocket space alongside it are rarely recovered, and what little testimony exists describes it as something close to a personal hell. It shows a documented aversion to sudden, intense light, which is the closest thing to a reliable weakness anyone's found, and the community has spent years arguing over whether the Foundation could actually kill it if they committed to trying. The file itself never quite settles this question. SCP-4666, the Yule Man. Unofficially, everyone reading this file calls this entity Krampus, or the Yule Man. Survivors describe something between 2 and 2.3 meters tall, elderly and emaciated, and always completely naked no matter how cold it is outside. This one operates on a strict yearly schedule, the 12 nights between December 21st and January 2nd, what the file itself calls its active phase, appearing only at isolated snowbound homes with a child under 8 inside, building up over the first week of being glimpsed at a distance before the final night when one of two things happens. In the far more common outcome, it knocks out the whole family, herdds them into one room, and kills everyone in front of each other, except one child under 8, which it takes. In the rare outcome, about 15% of recorded cases, nobody in the family is actually harmed. Footsteps are heard overnight with no sign of forced entry, and in the morning, these children just find toys waiting at the foot of their beds. These toys, though, in both outcomes, turn out to be crudely built from the remains of children it's abducted in the past. DNA testing on one batch of teeth found every single one belonged to a different child, ranging in age from a few days old to over 4 centuries old. The earliest confirmed sighting on file traces back to Croatia in 1466, though the Foundation itself didn't connect the pattern until 1974, through a program built specifically to catch recurring anomalous signatures. And it's still averaging multiple incidents worldwide every single December. SCP-1440. This entity looks like a ordinary elderly man, silver beard, deeply lined face, and simple pleasant clothes. It also hasn't aged a day in the 50 years since the Foundation first learned of him, though he won't say how old he actually is or if he even knows. He carries almost nothing: a sack of unknown material, a worn deck of cards, and a small glass cup. Spend more than a few days in his presence, whether you're a person or just a building he's been sleeping in, and increasingly destructive events start happening around him, escalating without fail until whatever it is destroyed or dead. He and his belongings are the only known exceptions. He knows exactly what he does to people. He avoids human contact whenever he can, and he isn't hostile in the slightest. But he's still compelled to travel along some deeply complex route that neither he nor anyone studying him has ever been able to decode. And that route keeps dragging him back into contact with people anyway. He's never once resisted an attempt to contain him. Every single attempt has ended in catastrophe regardless. The very first time the Foundation brought him in for a routine interview, the entire site was destroyed. Hundreds of personnel died, and 6 other contained anomalies were lost in the wreckage. Every subsequent containment attempt has gone the same way. He's currently loose and unaccounted for, and the file admits outright that the Foundation may not actually have any way to hold him without losses. He spent what's implied to be centuries completely alone by necessity, since anyone who stays close enough for long enough only ever ends up hurt. In his own words, everyone always eventually goes away. SCP-682, Hard to Destroy Reptile. If you ask this fandom to name the single most dangerous thing on the entire site, this is usually the answer. Vaguely reptilian, constantly changing size and shape depending on what it's recently consumed, and openly, deliberately hostile to all life without exception. It's said this directly in its own interviews because, of course, it's also highly intelligent. Acid, fire, decapitation, and outright detonation have all been tried and have all failed to do more than cost it time to regrow. It's been recorded functioning and speaking with the vast majority of its body destroyed or rotted away. Current containment keeps it permanently submerged in a custom acid bath, specifically because that's one of the only environments it can't easily escape or ignore, and staff are under strict orders never to speak to it directly, since conversation alone has been enough to trigger a rage state. Across its documented history, it has escaped containment several times out of a much larger number of attempts, and the death toll from those escapes is generally described as being in the thousands. SCP-4715. At minimum height, this thing is already 5.2 meters tall and 2,300 kilograms, or over 2 tons. A 6-legged carnivore built from a genetic patchwork that includes modern species, unsettling human DNA among them, Ice Age megafauna like giant ground sloths and cave lions, and material from other anomalous creatures the file won't specify further. It has 2 full sets of forelimbs, backwards swept horns unlike anything found in nature, and intelligence roughly on par with a chimpanzee. Its actual anomaly is whenever it senses that any sapient being nearby, including itself, is the target of real harmful intent, it starts gaining mass, proportional to how many hostile entities are involved and how intense that hostility is, from a source nobody's identified. The worst confirmed breach saw it balloon to roughly 24 meters tall and about 60 tons before the effects were reversed. And historical depictions suggest it's capable of getting even bigger under the right conditions, as it's been observed actively trying to provoke conflict between people, specifically so it can grow. Which means the single most dangerous thing anyone can do around it is exactly what instinct tells most people to do around something huge and armored: get aggressive. And armored is the right word. It shrugs off conventional weapons and physical trauma, doesn't need to eat to survive, resists most toxins, radiation, and chemicals, and its skin oils make it basically temperature proof, from negative 150 Celsius to over 1600 Celsius. It also regenerates lost limbs within about a week. In the entire recorded history of anyone trying to hurt this thing, nobody has ever managed to damage its skull, spine, or central nervous system even once. The only things that reliably affect it are, interestingly, tear gas and pepper spray. Containment authorizes a thermobaric bomb as the last resort in the event of a full breach, with the explicit warning that recontainment has to happen before it's able to recover from that. What makes this entity interesting is that it's been around for millennia, with cave paintings of its existence. This is a creature that's been part of human conflict for over 30,000 years, and the Foundation didn't even confirm its existence until 1916. SCP-2521. Twice the height of an average human and wrapped head to foot in sticky black ribbon-like tendrils, this thing doesn't erase information so much as it's obsessed with itself. The instant anyone writes down or says out loud a description of what it is, takes the paper or the recording or the file, and if the description was detailed enough, takes the person who made it too. Interestingly, handled the way you'd hold something you love rather than a creature with its next kill. It has no ability to recognize pictures at all, only language, which means the Foundation's actual internal file on it contains not one written word. Every containment note, every experiment log, every procedure is drawn instead in pictographs and diagrams, because writing any of it down in plain English would summon the exact thing the documentation exists to keep contained. Physically, almost nothing has ever stopped it. It teleports away the instant it's cornered, phases through anything solid in its path, and out of every subject the Foundation has used to experiment with, only SCP-682 has ever resisted being taken. SCP-3199. Humans refuted. Part chicken, part chimpanzee, part freshwater mussel, part viper, and part human by DNA, standing just under 3 meters and weighing close to 800 kilograms at full maturity, this is a hunting species built like a checklist of things gone wrong at once. They stay roughly half a kilometer of any of their hatchlings that haven't reached full growth, and when they catch prey, human or animal, no apparent preference, they liquefy the internal organs and skeleton outright before hauling the remains back to whatever's waiting to be fed. Reproduction is its own disgusting horror. Eggs pass down through the digestive tract and back out through the esophagus and mouth, followed by a coercive discharge, with the entity itself showing visible, prolonged distress throughout a process personnel have described as sounding close to a scream. Individually, one of these things is roughly as tough as an average human being, nothing supernatural about its durability, nothing that survives an unusual amount of gunfire. The actual danger is a breeding problem. Every single instance from birth carries one backup egg sealed inside its own body, meaning killing it still leaves behind exactly what's needed to start the population over from a single animal. Left uncontained and given enough time, the Foundation's own internal modeling treats a single instance as a plausible seed for an eventual full replacement of humanity as the planet's dominant species. One of the few entities on the entire list where killing the thing in front of you isn't actually the hard part. SCP-3000. This entity is a massive aquatic serpentine entity that looks like an enormous moray reel, though nobody has ever actually been able to measure its full length. Every attempt to trace where it ends has failed. Its name comes directly from Hindu mythology, representing the cosmic serpent upon which Vishnu rests between cycles of creation and destruction, a being tied to infinite time itself. What's more important is what happens to the mind of anyone who spends enough time near it or studying it. Memory and cognition simply come apart. The article itself is framed almost entirely through the personnel logs of a research team assigned to study it over an extended deployment, and the horror escalates through what happens to them. Their memories degrade in real time, entry by entry, until one researcher, Dr. Manava, is eventually found unresponsive, his mind unraveled badly enough by the point that he took his own life rather than keep enduring it. Another team member, further along the deterioration, becomes convinced they're in the presence of an actual god, a being that exists across all of time simultaneously, one that will be still watching after the universe itself has gone dark, when nothing else is left. The article never actually settles whether that's true. One of the last surviving voices in the log pushes back directly on the god theory, arguing it might simply be an unknown, massive ancient animal that evaded discovery for reasons nobody understands, holding no more malice than any other predator. SCP-2845. Very few files openly admit that losing this thing means a nuclear response as step 1. It arrived in December 2011 on a fragment that broke a comet during its solar approach, crashing in the Pacific before reaching land as an enormous mint-green furred deer with a human face and antlers ringed in floating ice and metal. Its real danger is a godlike ability to transmute matter through energy beams, solid to liquid, gas to solid, flesh to metal, the result staying stable even when they shouldn't. Anyone caught in the blast becomes SCP-2845-1, a living hexagonal column with no organs but a single brain, all of them telepathically linked to each other. Capturing it took a 3-week artillery campaign with the Global Occult Coalition to drive it into Site 100, a 9-ring facility housing 216 converted columns alongside the creature itself, kept at negative 110 degrees Celsius in a hydrogen-heavy atmosphere. What actually holds it, though, isn't the site. It's a ritual cycle repeated every 63 hours and 54 minutes, escalating from a masked comedic play and a live band performance to disturbing sacrificial rituals involving D-class subjects, the worst of which involves the consumption of a child. For all intents and purposes, SCP-2845 is a real god, unbound by physics, and gods respond to belief and precise ritual rather than force. The Foundation has essentially tricked it into believing it's contained. The rituals weren't invented from scratch either. They were reverse engineered by listening to the telepathically linked SCP-2845-1 columns, who apparently passed along the terms of their own god's containment to the people studying them. SCP-3812. This is one of the most dangerous single entities on the site, and the file says so almost directly. It's logged as a Level 13 existential threat, with a footnote admitting that calling it Keter, like everything else here, doesn't really mean much, since at any moment, it could cause a global breach and catastrophic damage to reality itself. It's only partially contained, or tracked rather than held, currently somewhere over the South Pacific. This entity used to be a person, Sam Howell, an ordinary man who is believed to have died in 1996. Ben was seen rising out of his own grave and disappearing. What it's become since is defined by a worsening psychiatric condition. Imagine an all-powerful god with schizophrenia. This is SCP-3812. It used to cooperate with research first, over 20 years that broke down into isolation and unpredictable behavior, and it could no longer perceive the world accurately at all. The dangerous part is what happens when its perception doesn't match reality. It alters reality to match whatever hallucinated, fabricated vision it sees instead. Most of these changes leave no trace, so there's no way to know how often it's happened or how many people simply stopped existing because of it. It obviously can't be physically contained, as any cell gets erased, and it removes threats to itself before they take effect, sometimes without even deciding to. It also has occasional violent outbursts, fatal to anyone nearby and catastrophic on a larger scale. One restricted incident in its file is logged as an XK-class extinction event, dated December 2016, which obviously didn't stick. A footnote adds that this exact document has been erased from reality and rewritten from memory 16 separate times. I hope you all enjoyed that very long video. As you guys could probably tell, this wasn't every single deadly SCP entity, even within my own constraints. So there is going to be a little honorable mention list going through the screen right now. This really was just an excuse to talk about some of my favorite SCPs. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching, and as always, good night.